All right, this is Mr. McMurray. Welcome back to Inorganic Chemistry Notes. And we had talked about inorganic compounds who are not produced by living things. They do not contain carbon, and they're relatively simple. And we talked mostly about water so far. We talked about how water has a positive side and a negative side, which means it is a polar molecule. And because of this polarity or polarness, it can be a solvent. It can cause things to dissolve. The positive part of salt, for example, we said Na would go to the negative side of the water, and the negative side, the chlorine, would go to the positive side of the water, and that's what happens when something dissolves in it. As long as there are water molecules for it to dissolve around, these are hydrogens, this would be oxygen, as long as there is, if you put water in this, a salt in the water, we said the sodium would go over here because it's positive, it's attracted to the negative side. Chlorine says, fine, I can take care of that, I'll go to the positive side. And when it separates in the water, that makes it disappear, and we say it has dissolved. Now, if you keep adding salt, it can keep doing that until every water molecule has already separated a chlorine. Once it has a sodium and a chlorine on it, it can't dissolve anymore. And so that's why when eventually something quits dissolving, it's because there is so much. Okay. We also talked about things that can't dissolve, can either float in the water. As long as they float in the water and never settle, they're called a colloid. But most things will eventually settle out, and those are called suspensions. Okay, and that is more common. Examples of some of that would be, for example, in our blood. We have your blood looks like just a red liquid. Technically, it's a clear yellow liquid, but it has so many little red blood cells running through it that it looks like it is red, but really it's a liquid. And if you took a blood sample and let it sit for a while, eventually all the little red blood vessels, red blood cells, will settle out, and you would end up with that clear yellowish liquid, look a lot like urine, on top. And so that's why if you've ever given blood, you've noticed they keep shaking up. Sometimes they'll put the blood sample, especially if it's over a long period of time. They will take it and sometimes they'll kind of shake it around and keep shaking it so that it doesn't settle out like this. And that is because your blood is a suspension. You also have white blood cells and platelets and some other things floating around in there. So your blood would be an example in your body of a suspension. All right. Now, the third thing we want to talk about water. This is all under water. We've talked about several things now. The third thing is that it allows for movement of molecules or substances, compounds, whatever you want to call that, substances through an organism or throughout organism. If you're bigger than one cell, you are going to have to send things from one part of your body to another part of your body. And almost all organisms have some type of water-based system. Something like starfish and jellyfish basically are just full of water. Okay, and the water sloshes around because they're not very big. Other ones are going to have some kind of circulation, some kind of heart pump, and some type of what we would call blood. In us, it's blood. In an insect, it's called hemolymph, I think, and it's kind of green colored. But whatever. It may not look the same, but it's always a water-based thing. Just like a river is used to carry things and boats and stuff from one place to another. Basically, there's some kind of water-based system in all living things that carries stuff from one part of the body to another, whether it be food, nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, waste products. All these things have to be moved around. Hormones have to be sent all over your body so that they will tell your body to do what they need to do. And so all that carrying stuff around is done in some kind of water-based system, okay? Some kind of liquid that's water-based that is used to carry stuff around. All right. Next characteristic is water has a high heat capacity. Or in physics, we would have said it has a high specific heat. Okay, what does that mean? Well, if you remember, or if you've seen the video where we put the piece of metal and the water on the hot plate, even though they have the same amount of mass and they have the same amount of heat going into them, the metal gets hot very, very quickly. Okay, because we would say metal, all right, has a low heat capacity or low specific heat. In other words, a little bit of heat will make the temperature go up quite a bit. Water, on the other hand, has a high heat capacity, okay? And that means it takes a lot of heat energy to make the temperature go up, okay? To make it get hotter, to make the temperature increase. Okay, I'm going to up arrow there for that. All right, so what does that mean for water? It means it heats up very slowly and it cools down very slowly, which means it stays at about the same temperature, which is good for us because we want our temperature to go outside. If I go outside at 102 degrees, which it has been lately, if I were made out of metal, I would heat up very quickly and get so hot that my body would begin to malfunction. Okay, it's because of my water, my body is 75% water, it heats up relatively slowly. Now, if I stay on it long enough or it gets hot enough, like inside of a car, it's still going to cause my body to overheat eventually. My body will try to sweat and do whatever it can to cool down, but eventually it's going to be too much, okay? But basically, our body allows us to absorb or release large amounts of heat. Of heat or heat energy without changing temperature very much, okay? And this is very important because we need our bodies to stay at a fairly constant temperature. If it gets too hot, there are hormones and enzymes that cause certain things to happen in our body, and they quit happening, they quit working. For example, breaking down glucose. One of the reasons well, yeah, it starts breaking down glucose. Well, if it doesn't break down glucose, then we don't have anything for energy, and then our brain and other parts of our body start to die and things like that. So it doesn't take very long for our temperature to get too high, and then these enzymes quit working, the chemical reactions quit working, and basically our bodies quit working, okay? So this fact that we don't heat up very fast, we don't cool down very slowly in the wintertime, we go outside, yes, the outer surface of your skin will get colder first. That's where you get frostbite and stuff like that on your fingertips, but the core part of your body stays at a pretty constant temperature, and that is a very important thing. All right. The next one is chemical reactivity. All right, now this is not the same as dissolving stuff in it that allows those chemicals to react. Water can actually be used to cause reactions, okay? In other words, water can split chemicals apart, which is called hydrolysis. Just for the hydro means water, lysis means to split, so basically we're using water to split things apart. Or it can be used to hook them compounds together. All right, and that is called dehydration. Dehydration means to take water away or dry something out. Synthesis. Synthesis means to build or put something together. If you synthesize a English paper or report, you're basically building something out of nothing, okay? So it's taking water away to build things up, or we add water to split things apart. All right, let's look real quickly. How can water be used to hook things together or apart? One common example, we'll talk about this more later in the year, is glucose. Now that's roughly what a glucose looks like, okay? Actually it's five-sided and with the oxygen and then a thing, but for now this is going to work. All right. It turns out that glucose has an OH group here, and it has an OH group here. Okay? Now, if glucose floats around our body, it gets used up for sugar and energy and burned real quick. So we need some way to hold on to it so we don't have to eat all the time, non-stop. So what our body does is it uses water, or takes water away from this to hook it together. So here's what happens. The water takes a hydrogen and an oxygen, and it takes another hydrogen. So you have two hydrogens and one oxygen, and what does that make? water. So we have water, and what does that leave us with up here? If we got rid of this hydrogen, oxygen, and the hydrogen over here, that only leaves us with an oxygen. And the oxygen can be used to hook those two together. So we took water away from it to hook it together. All right. So that would be dehydration. You're taking water away, drying it out, and hooking it together. And eventually this would make a starch. And a starch might have thousands of these glucoses all hooked together. And we use water, which is very common in your body. We said 3/4 of your body is water. So it's really easy to hook it together. Now, say you're running a marathon and you say, hey, I need some of that energy. I ate lots of pasta and stuff today. I need to get that energy back. Well, your body just adds water back to that, and one of the hydrogens joins up over here, and the other hydrogen and oxygen join up over here, and these split back apart, and they become OH and OH, and it becomes two glucoses, and you can burn those glucoses up, because you can burn glucose up, but you can't do a dried up starch. And so that would be hydrolysis. You're adding water back to it, putting the water back to it, and splitting them apart. So dehydration synthesis, you're drying it out and hooking them together with the oxygen that's left over after you take out two hydrogens and oxygen. When you add water back to that and turn it back into two OHs and they split apart, then that is called hydrolysis. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later as we get into organic compounds. But water is very important as a way to put things together in your body and take them back apart. All right. Next one, and I believe it's the last one for water, is cushioning. Okay, cushioning. Cushioning, just kind of like padding, or protecting things. Probably the most common one is cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF. We'll go ahead and write that out though. I'm not writing very well. Hang on. Let me try that again. Okay. Cerebral spinal fluid. Cerebral has to do with your head or brain, and spinal, of course, has to do with your spine and fluid. And basically, your brain inside your skull is floating. Here's your eye and your nose and your mouth. Okay, that hopefully you don't look like that. But anyhow, your brain is in here, and then your spinal cord goes down your back. But all around it is this fluid. All right, and this fluid acts as a cushion. If you were to lean forward, your brain doesn't slam into your skull. This fluid in here cushions it against hitting the skull. Okay, and this works very well. Now, if you get in football and you have a big 300, 400-pound lineman slamming into a running back, and they're both going full speed, this may not be enough to help, and that's why there's a lot of brain injuries as people age that were in boxing or football or other contact sports, hockey and so forth, because yes, it can cushion, but there's a limit to it. There's also this same cushioning fluid all around the spinal fluid. Another big place that you might see that is in amniotic fluid. And this is what surrounds the fetus in a pregnant woman in the womb. Okay, if this is the woman, here's the womb, and then you have the baby in here. I'm just going to draw a little stick baby because I'm like, all right. Same kind of principle. You've got this amniotic fluid here that kind of cushions it. So if the mom gets jostled a little bit or something, the baby will be protected. Once again, if the mother gets hit hard enough, then it may not be enough to protect it, but at least it gives it cushioning for that. The last one is synovial fluid. All right, we don't probably hear that one as much, but synovial fluid is found in your joints and between some of your bones. The end of this bone and this bone, there will be these little sacs of fluid. And so when you run and stuff, keep your bones from grinding on each other. They also have cartilage on them that helps protect them and let them slide. But they have these little cushions of fluid that help keep the bones from grinding on each other. All right, so that pretty much covers for water. And come back next time and we will be oxygen, carbon dioxide, and we'll talk a little bit about acids and bases. So see you on the flip side.